Mirror's Edge is a 2008 3D platformer that is adored to this day for its unique art style, memorable music, and of course, because of its addictive first-person parkour gameplay. You play as a runner named Faith, tasked with discreetly free-running across rooftops to deliver information off the grid of the city's totalitarian government. It's a relatively short game, clocking in at about 4 to 6 hours on most people's first playthrough. Once you complete the story, though, you unlock individual chapter speedruns to try. For me, and for many other Mirror's Edge players, this was our gateway into speedrunning. The game gives you a gold time to beat for each chapter, and it even throws some time trials at you to try as well. But after you master each individual chapter, you come to the next obvious question. How fast could I beat the whole game? And could I beat it faster than anyone else in the whole world? This is the story of the runners who took on that challenge. This is the world record history for Mirror's Edge Any Percent. In the early days of Mirror's Edge speedrunning, there wasn't a central place for people to track their full game runs. Runners instead opted to climb their way up the in-game leaderboards. The game's main story is split into 10 chapters. Once you complete Mirror's Edge for the first time, you unlock a speedrun mode for each chapter, each with its own in-game leaderboard. Let's briefly talk through the chapters. In Prologue, you parkour across rooftops, avoiding guards to deliver a package to a fellow runner named Celeste. In Chapter 1, you make your way through Pope's office, across some rooftops, and through Centurion Plaza while escaping the scene of a murder that your sister is being framed for. In Chapter 2, you take a trip through the storm drains, before chasing down a runner named Jackknife, who has information about your sister's framing. In Chapter 3, you break into the office of a suspect of the murder, before running across more rooftops to escape. In Chapter 4, you interrogate this suspect, before escaping through the city's subway system. In Chapter 5, you make your way to the New Eden Mall to chase down another potential suspect in the murder. In Chapter 6, you break into a training facility for the city's private police force, and you learn that the police are training their own runners to hunt you down. In Chapter 7, you break into a boat to chase down one of these newly trained runners, who you find was actually the culprit behind the murder the whole time. With the murder solved, you spend Chapter 8 climbing the atrium and breaking your sister out of a prison van. And, in Chapter 9, you climb your way up the Shard, the city's tallest building, to confront the mastermind behind the murder and your sister's framing. Keep in mind that there was no in-game leaderboard for full game runs, so people really only focused on these individual level runs for the first few years of the game's lifespan. But that would finally change in 2012. The first full game speedrun can be found hosted to this day on Speed Demo's archive, completed by David Weatherproof Streeter. He beat Mirror's Edge in about an hour, clocking in at just over 1 hour and 2 minutes real time. Let's see how he did it. In Prologue, he keeps it pretty simple, jumping from roof to roof and trying to avoid any momentum mistakes. Early on, you can see him side jumping to gain speed. By side jumping and turning your camera during the animation, you can maintain the full speed that the animation gives you, bypassing the normal 5-second acceleration that Faith does. It's worth noting that there are multiple paths through every level in Mirror's Edge. Some completely intended, others maybe not so much. For example, we can see Weatherproof avoiding the stairs and instead using a more direct route. Optimizations like this are great, shaving off a few seconds at a time, and it's really what Mirror's Edge is all about. Chapter 1 is also clean, although Weatherproof does note some momentum mistakes, like the time he accidentally gets a hard landing before entering Pope's office. Weatherproof is also utilizing a PC exclusive glitch called the Use glitch. By sliding near a button and spamming the Use key, Weatherproof is able to activate the button while skipping the 1 to 2 second button clicking animation. These small time saves add up over the course of the run, trust me. Later in the chapter, he utilizes a skip that abuses the wall run kick animation. The player is set to a grounded state for 1 frame after the animation. Weatherproof uses this to his advantage to reset his fall height and skip to a later section of the level. In Chapter 2, Weatherproof laments the RNG. These pesky guards take pot shots at him as he enters the storm drains, but he's able to stave it off with a cheeky skip. But mostly, he just saves time by cutting corners, using clever jumps to do small skips, such as this skip to the scaffolding and storm drains, and just by not dying. Same deal with Chapter 3. He goes through all 4 checkpoints, mostly as intended. Chapter 4 is also done as intended. You make your way through the building, fight this beefy guy named Ropeburn in a minute-long cutscene, and try to avoid getting hit by a train in the subway. Chapter 5 is pretty standard. He goes into the scaffolding in the first checkpoint, takes the elevator back up to the rooftops, and then makes his way through the mall, pretty much as intended. You're probably seeing a theme here. Chapter 6, he goes through the whole factory level as intended. Chapter 7, he goes through the whole boat, pretty much as intended. Chapter 8, he goes through the rooftops, up the atrium, and through the vents, as intended. And finally, he wraps up Chapter 9 with relative ease. This involves waiting in this elevator, climbing through the elevator shaft, jumping past these snipers, and doing this final brawl with some guards in the server room. And this isn't to discredit Weatherproof's achievements. Mirror's Edge, as intended, is a difficult game. To get through the full game with no unintentional deaths is impressive, and this run has earned its spot as the most watched Mirror's Edge speedrun of all time. Of course, there's room for improvement, and even Weatherproof admits that. On Speed Demos Archive, he describes this difficult technique he didn't implement involving the wall run kick animation. Nowadays, we call what he's describing the kick glitch. Essentially, the trick involves hitting a frame-perfect jump after the end of a kick animation, allowing the player to cross large gaps with high speeds. As Weatherproof puts it, I did not use the wall run kick jump because that is a very black magic-like trick that rarely works. I have never had any luck getting it to work even rarely, let alone consistently. This is one of the best tricks to do in the game, though you will see segmented runs using this frequently. But when there's an exploit this powerful, it won't take too long for runners to take advantage. Turns out, the kick glitch is pretty consistent if you bind your mouse wheel to the jump key, which you can do in the in-game menu. With this new movement power, and about a year later, a runner named SplitsGames was able to cut down the record by almost 11 minutes. You see SplitsGames take advantage of another trick related to your mouse wheel, wall boosts. By quickly jumping on and off a wall using the scroll wheel, you gain speed far quicker than simply running. You can see him do this all over the place. Whereas Weatherproof would often opt to run through the area like a normal human being, SplitsGames is jumping and wall boosting all over the place. Mirror's Edge is a game entirely centered around its movement mechanics. I made a whole video trying to catalog the encyclopedia of movement tech in this game. So within the community, we often talk about a runner's movement. How smooth is it? How well is he taking advantage of his environment? The reason I bring this up now is because SplitsGames has a pretty similar route to Weatherproof, but a lot of his time save is in his movement alone. Now that's not to say there weren't new skips. Armed with the movement power of the kick glitch, SplitsGames was able to take advantage of many new routes through the level. Rather than going around, he's able to kick glitch over this fence at the end of Chapter 2. He's able to jump out of bounds and kick glitch back in bounds in the crane section of Chapter 3, saving a minute or so over Weatherproof's route. SplitsGames also introduces us to some early sequence breaks. Here, in Chapter 4, we see him climb up this rooftop using the billboard, fall back down into a later part of the level, and grab a checkpoint out of bounds. Now that he's grabbed the checkpoint, he can quit and reload the level, so not only will he skip the traversal through the building, but also a minute-long cutscene fight with Ropeburn. Chapter 5 is done pretty much the same, albeit with better movement. However, SplitsGames also utilizes a new skip in Chapter 6. By rolling off an invisible wall, Faith can survive a fall to the out-of-bounds street area. From here, SplitsGames hits an invisible loading trigger, and you can just watch as the level loads around him, saving a minute of running through the factory. Now get this. Chapter 7 of Mirror's Edge is called the boat. The first checkpoint is outside the boat, then there are 3 or 4 checkpoints in the boat, and the level ends with the final checkpoint outside the boat. I hope you're thinking what I'm thinking. SplitsGames is able to skip the entirety of Chapter 7 by climbing and kick glitching out of bounds, running to that final checkpoint of the level, quitting and reloading. This saves 3 or 4 minutes over Weatherproof's run. A slightly faster variation of this skip is still used to this day. SplitsGames wraps it up with a cleaner Chapter 8 and 9 that more or less follows Weatherproof's route. This run was a huge leap for Mirror's Edge speedruns, and as you can guess, the run was unbeatable for about 19 days. A large chunk of the speedrunning content being uploaded in the first few years after release can be linked back to a PS3 American runner named Oven Donkey.
Okay, hello everyone. One of the most requested things ever for me to do ever has been to record a tutorial for the kick glitch, and I'm actually gonna do that now.
Seriously, ask any runner that played the game around that time, and almost all of them will attribute their start to Oven Donkey. His tutorials focused on showcasing strats for the in-game chapter speedruns, helping early runners get those PS3 trophies and Xbox 360 achievements. And it was him that came over to any% and lowered the record by another 3 or so minutes in April of 2013. It's actually Oven and another runner named ZeroCool that found many of the skips you saw in that last run, including the Chapter 4 skip, the skip into the factory in Chapter 6, and the whole Chapter 7 skip. Oven Donkey used many of the same skips at Split Games, with a few new ones here and there. For example, in Chapter 2, before the storm drains, Oven Donkey utilized a new out-of-bounds skip that allows him to fall into a later checkpoint in the level. He also utilizes a new variation on that skip in Chapter 4. Whereas Split Games climbed up onto the rooftop and jumped into the third checkpoint of the level, Oven Donkey falls down to the streets, bunny hops for about a minute over to the fifth checkpoint of the level.
That's good.
There were a few deaths here and there, but it was by no means a bad run.
No, I can't. Losing time.
At this point, Mirror's Edge full game runs were starting to get more popular, so it's not surprising that about 2 weeks later, we see a prominent Norwegian runner enter the scene, Floobs. Floobs swooped in and lowered the record by another 4 or so minutes. Remember how I emphasized the importance of clean movement? That was Floobs' strength. He didn't have many fancy new strats, just consistency and clean movement. But Oven Donkey wasn't going to take that lying down. 2 months later, Oven Donkey came back with a 33-second improvement on the world record.
Oh, God!
What the f happened?
I did it. No, nothing bad happened. That was excitement clap.
Runners knew that there was more obvious time to save, but without any new skips, it'd be difficult. Any% as a whole was starting to pick up steam. Both Oven Donkey and Floobs were being fed new routes from montage videos created in 2012 and 2013 by some of the earliest and most innovative Mirror's Edge strat finders. Runners would discuss new strats they found or routes they were theorizing in the YouTube comments, but there was still no central place for Mirror's Edge speedrun discussion. Thankfully, around that time, a Skype group finally emerged where runners could gather and discuss their any% runs, and a Google Sheets leaderboard emerged to track everyone's rankings. IL runners were starting to take notice. Unlike the any% runners, these IL runners had really picked apart each individual chapter of the game, finding little wall boosts or kick glitches that save a second or two here and there. In retrospect, it made sense that a former IL world record holder would come in and take the any% crown. But nobody could have anticipated the rise of a Mirror's Edge legend, Submit. Having gathered some Chapter 1 world records in his time, Swedish runner Submit finally turned his attention to any%. In May of 2013, Submit swooped in with another 30-second improvement on the world record. He wasn't doing any new skips, he just had faster setups and less momentum mistakes. While Oven Donkey took some time to set up the sequence break in the storm drains, you'll see Submit just run for it. Whereas Oven Donkey flubbed some wall boosts during Chapter 4 skip, Submit was flying through the level with ease. It was by no means a perfect run though. Just look at the second to last checkpoint, where Submit died twice trying to get past these guards in Chapter 9. Submit knew there was work to do.
Nay.
In the span of 2 months, Submit lowered the world record 2.5 minutes. With his intimate knowledge of each level, Submit implemented better routes more consistently than the runners before him. To be fair, there were a few new skips helping him out. In May of 2013, Oven Donkey found a new method for doing Chapter 4 skip. Rather than going out of bounds on the left side of the building and running out of bounds for a minute or so, it's actually faster to roll out of bounds over here and then death abuse into a different checkpoint. Additionally, Submitted started implementing IL-only strats. Take, for example, this Chapter 5 strat, found by a runner named Darkwish in 2012, called Couch Strats, that uses an unintended springboard on a yellow couch to skip a slow elevator ride. But I want to be clear, the new Chapter 4 skip saved about 12 seconds, and the IL strat in Chapter 5 saved maybe 20. Submit was not just carried by new strats. He was, somehow, just that much faster than all the rest of us. If you remember, Floobs was able to beat Oven Donkey earlier that year thanks to his better movement, and Submit was able to similarly beat Floobs on the strength and smoothness of his every action as he glided through the level. Submit was coming up to the sub 40 and fast. He had mastered the side jump glitch, the kick glitch, the use glitch. At this point, it was just a matter of doing it all together in a single run. For many, there might have been a mental barrier that made this huge milestone seem unachievable, but Submit wasn't that kind of guy. Submit ended up smashing through the sub 40 barrier with a 39.26, only 12 days later in July of 2013. At this time, no other runner had achieved a sub 41, let alone a sub 40. Submit ended up submitting this run to SDA, making it another of the most watched any % runs on YouTube. And, finally satisfied with his run after 2 months of grinding, he decided to take a break from full game runs. Re-watching the 39.26 for this video, I found literally 3 mistakes. 1 unintentional death in the storm drains that lost maybe 6 seconds, 1 missed sniper shot in Chapter 8 that lost him maybe 2 or 3 seconds, and nerves probably caused him to waste some time on this skip in Chapter 9, losing maybe 8 or so seconds. The run looked flawless, and no other runners were close to matching Submit's consistency. It would take the efforts of a whole community to dethrone the king. With Submit now minutes ahead of the competition, runners had to admit that they weren't going to be able to beat Submit anytime soon unless they found some new skips. Right away, they got to work. In August of 2013, longtime glitch hunters Lambo and Greystar worked together to find a new out-of-bounds skip early in Chapter 1, which saved 15 seconds. By jumping into this room and deloading the previous area, runners could get out of bounds and kick glitch to an invisible ramp later in the level. It was difficult, but seeing as it was only 3 minutes into the run, runners started going for it regularly. About a month later, in September, Greystar swooped in with another skip, this time right near the end of Chapter 9. By grabbing this lamp, you can get out of bounds and jump along this seam in the wall. This skips the entire sniper section on the player's right, saving between 5 and 10 seconds. In January of 2014, a runner named New Left was messing around with this sign and found that the collision gets a little wonky if you perform a certain climb-up animation on it. If you do the animation just right, and you get a little lucky, then you'll clip up through these stairs. Named after its finder, New Left skip saves between 20 and 40 seconds, depending on whether or not you do couch strats. Just 4 days after that, skip-finding legend Oven Donkey was able to find a skip for a notorious elevator right at the end of the game, in Chapter 9. Normally, you have to wait in this elevator for about 30 seconds while listening to an advertisement for beverages. However, by utilizing the use glitch and hitting this button through the wall, Oven Donkey found that you can walk out of the elevator while the level is loading and skip the entire elevator ride. This comically named beverage skip who was more or less tied with New Left Skip as the biggest time save that we found around that time. Meanwhile, while those skips were being found, runners continued to grind to catch up to Zamit's consistency, most notably a runner named Rigger and our returning champ, Floobs. Armed with these new skips and months of practice, Rigger got the first sub 41 in January of 2014, days before the beverage skip was found.
40:45:09, so
Yeah.
I'm currently sub 41.
It was now a race between Floobs and Rigger to finally beat Zamit's time. Run killers like Chapter 4 skip, the factory skip in Chapter 6, and the boat skip in Chapter 7 were becoming less and less of a threat. They were becoming routine as the two runners became better and better. Could New Left Skip and Beverage Skip finally turn the tides? Later that same January, only 6 days after Beverage Skip was first discovered, we would get our answer.
I need to get world record, so I guess I just have to play. No. Oh. This is actually going to be pretty close. Oh my god. I got world record. I split a little bit late.
After 9 long months of Zamit's monopoly on the category, Floobs was finally able to pull off a 39.25. It proved that Zamit wasn't, in fact, untouchable. Although the new skips helped, Floobs' movement developed a lot in those months of grinding. It kinda makes you wonder, what would happen if Zamit returned and he had access to all these skips? Zamit took notice pretty quickly when Floobs got the record. We can only assume that he immediately started practicing, because literally the day after Floobs' 39.25, Zamit uploaded a world record for the Chapter 8 IL. The king was back, and he was coming for his throne. Keep in mind, it took about 6 months for Floobs to beat Zamit's world record. It only took Zamit 9 days to get it back.
I've only practiced Chapter 8 speedrun and the new skips, and I've done some runs.
Zamit lowered the record to a 39.12. However, at this point, Zamit was not the untouchable deity he once used to be. This Chapter 3 demonstrates that more than anything. Floobs wasn't going to take this lying down. The next day, Floobs shot back with a 39.05.
Wow. I told you guys that I was gonna get the world record today, and what did I do? Got the world record today.
A week later, Zamit snagged a 39.01 and then smashed through the next minute barrier with a 38.46 in March of 2014. After this run, Zamit would go on another well-deserved break. But Floobs wasn't done. Armed with a recently discovered setup of the Chapter 9 beverage skip that skipped even further into the level, Floobs was finally able to deal the killing blow and secure his spot at the top with a 38.26.
It was literally
World record.
world record. Yeah.
With Floobs' revolution against the king, other hopeful runners began to rise up the ranks. Notably, a runner named Chillmaster achieved the third ever sub 40 with his 38.30, only 4 seconds slower than Floobs. Maybe just as notable as the runs at this time is the shift that was happening in speedrunning broadly. Around this time, speedrunning was starting to become more and more mainstream with the rise of Games Done Quick and speedrun.com. As the Mirror's Edge community was exposed to these other PC speedruns in other communities, we began to question certain rules in any percent. First of all, you probably haven't noticed that all Mirror's Edge speedruns so far have been done on normal difficulty, rather than on easy. If you're a frequent speedrun viewer, you're probably thinking, well, there must be a reason they play on normal, it's probably faster or something. Well, no, it's not. Speedruns on normal are generally more difficult because you have less health, which means you're more likely to die if the guards get a few lucky shots on you. On top of that, you actually lose time on normal due to this boss fight at the end of Chapter 7, since the boss has slightly more health on the normal difficulty. Now, keep in mind that IL runs of the game, by default, were locked into normal difficulty. Therefore, early IL runners, who came over at any percent, thought it made sense to keep all runs on a level playing field. Even though easy difficulty is right there, ripe for the taking. With more exposure to the broader speedrun community, mentality began to shift. I mean, this is any percent, so anything goes. Because easy ultimately meant there'd be less random deaths and more time save, the community decided to switch to easy in July of 2014. Remember Chillmaster's 3830 from earlier? That run was on easy difficulty. There's something else we haven't discussed yet. Load screens. Like with any PC game, Mirror's Edge loads very differently depending on your PC. In fact, load times can vary by a minute or so depending on the runner. In mid-2014, other speedrun communities began to time out the load times from their speedruns, either using a custom-made timer that interfaces with the game's memory, or just by doing it by hand. Thankfully, in July of 2014, a PC modder named Fatalis graced us with a live split plugin that could automatically time out loads in real time for Mirror's Edge. All future times I'll be discussing will be with load times removed. So, to keep things fair, our mods went back and retimed the top runs using the same parameters as the live split plugin. Floop's 3826 RTA run was retimed to a 3601 without loads. Mods also found that, with loads accounted for, Chillmaster's 3830 RTA was a 3555 without loads, retroactively making it the legitimate world record at that time. With a proper timing method and less RNG to worry about on easy difficulty, any percent was seeming more and more appealing compared to those optimized IL runs. The last time a prominent IL runner came over to full game runs, it spawned a legend. Could that really happen again? Here enters another Mirror's Edge legend, an Australian runner going simply by Rec. If you looked at the leaderboard at the beginning of July, you might not have thought much of Rec. He started running the game in late 2013, and managed to get the Chapter 1 IL world record in mid-2014. Along with Floobs and a few other runners, he also contributed to the Mirror's Edge Done Quick segmented Any Percent run that was set to release later that year. But what you need to know about Rec is that he does most of his best work offline. We only got to see his progress when he uploaded, and he's the kind of guy who only uploads runs that he's proud of. In early July, seemingly out of nowhere, Rec posted his own sub-40 RTA run, the fourth person to ever break that barrier. With Zemit still on a break, many figured that Floobs didn't have much to worry about. But few would have predicted that later that July, Rec would join the fray with a world record of his own. Rec and Floobs traded the world record for months. Floobs got it back in August. Rec took it back again in November. Through their combined efforts, they managed to lower the world record from a 35.49 to a 33.21. Mostly, they did that by pushing each other to optimize the little stuff. Better wall boosts, less momentum mistakes, slight improvements in their side jump boosts and bunny hops. They were also stealing strats from the IL community, like this new climbing method in the Chapter 2 storm drains. The biggest new discovery that helped get the time down was the beamer. However, it might be more accurate to call it a beamer renaissance. Way back in 2012, Avanaki made a video explaining this trick called the sidestep beamer, discovered by a runner named ExoRace.
But the glitch is basically you wall climb and do a side jump in certain places at a certain timing, and you'll kind of fly backwards really far. It's kind of weird.
Then, years later in 2014, a runner and strat hunter named Curb Stomp Santa started experimenting with beamers everywhere, and eventually discovered you could use a beamer to skip a large chunk of the mall in Chapter 5. If this area seems familiar, it's because it's the exact same location as where New Left Skip was found. Despite being frame perfect, the beamer was much easier and almost equal in time save to New Left Skip, and it became a necessary addition to the any percent route. That brings us to December of 2014. With Rek and Floobs continuing to lower their times, Submit's time was starting to look outdated. Submit left behind an RTA PB of 38:46. And it wasn't just former world record holders like Floobs and Chillmaster beating Submit's time. Even scrubs like Black Belt Jinja and Ninja were beating it. The king was ready for one last shot at the throne. It was at this point that Floobs took a break from the game, and although Floobs would remain a top runner, he would never again contend for the world record. With Floobs out of the running, it seems Amit was doing it again, coming back and, in the span of only 1 or 2 weeks, besting runners who had been grinding for months. Luckily for us, the community had come a long way since then. Rek wasn't through just yet. 5 days later, Rek shot back with another record of his own, 33:01. Whether Zamit was motivated to improve on his own merits, or whether he was motivated by competition, I'm not sure. But in February of 2015, Zamit continued to improve, and improve, and improve, and improve.
Okay.
Zamit's 32:16 is still his PB to this day. Thanks to Zamit's skill, dedication, and to the popularity of that 2013 world record he submitted to SDA, Zamit went on to become a QA tester at DICE. He ended up working on the eventual reboot to Mirror's Edge Catalyst. He's actually responsible for the naming of one of Catalyst's dashes after another Mirror's Edge strat hunting legend. The end of Zamit's story marks the beginning of another era in Mirror's Edge speedrunning. Rek ended up claiming the record back by breaking another minute barrier and getting a 31:50 in February of 2015. And he did it, at least partially, thanks to a new skip of his own discovery, Canal Skip. Rek found that by getting out of bounds and shading together some very specific kick glitches in the canal section of Chapter 2, you can skip right into the storm drains and save about 45 seconds. This skip is hard. Top runners nowadays tend to get it a little over 50% of the time, but new runners have been known to attempt the skip for hours without getting it once. For many, it feels like a coin flip about 8 minutes into the run. But that's not all. As Rek comes into the home stretch of Chapter 9, he does something else incredibly risky. He lines himself up for a newly discovered version of Beverage Skip, now coined by the community as Super Beverage Skip. He also does something really interesting. He uses the in-game reaction time feature. It's not something we've talked about yet, but reaction time slows the game down. It's intended to help casual players time tricky jumps or disarm strong enemies, and it can be used similarly by speedrunners. Using reaction time loses about 5 seconds in a speedrun, so nobody really uses it, except here it is, in a world record of all places. Rek used reaction time to maintain adequate speed and line up a perfect angle to achieve Super Bev. It made the trick go from a 1% consistency to closer to 50% consistency, and it still saved 30 seconds over the normal beverage skip. Of course, it's risky. It was another 50-50 shot at the very end of the run, but 30 seconds was just too much time saved to ignore. At this point, Rek decided to take a few months off of any percent, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't playing Mirror's Edge. Here's the thing. Rek wasn't only a great runner, but also a prolific strat hunter. Rek would solidify his mastery of both when, in March of 2015, after months of playing and editing, Rek released Mirror's Edge Segmented in 26:54, a segmented any percent showcase that was almost 5 minutes faster than the current world record of 31:50. With the release of Rek's segmented run came the official reveal of some new any percent skips. There were lots of small time saves in Segmented that weren't in the current world record, like the newly discovered method of clipping out of elevators to hit load zones early, found by Newlaft earlier that year. You couldn't do it on every elevator, but where you could, it saved a few seconds each time. Rec also implemented quite a few skips that weren't single segment viable, like this kicklet chain in Chapter 2, which Rec says took him 7 hours to get just once for the recording. Or, thanks to the combined efforts of many strat hunters throughout the years, Rec was able to get out of bounds and pull off this crazy kicklet chain that lets you skip from checkpoint 3A to checkpoint 3C, skipping checkpoint 3B entirely. The list goes on and on. However, for every near impossible skip Rec implemented, there were a few that stick out. For example, there was the implementation of a chapter-only skip called Crane's Kick Glitch. The trick had been known about for a while. Months prior, in August of 2014, IL legend Izzyfly showed off this kick glitch that skips the titular crane in his video, Chapter 3, Big Jump Shortcut. But this isn't any ordinary kick glitch. On this wall at the end of Chapter 3, if you approach at a specific angle, have absolutely perfect speed, time the kick correctly, and jump at the correct time, you can skip to the last building of the level. Thanks to the perfectly placed ledge at the edge of the building, if you do everything exactly right, you'll get what's called a speedy kick glitch. It's extremely precise, and there are only a handful of runners who have ever gotten it even in an IL run. It saves about 20 seconds, but it wasn't single segment viable. Oh, and remember the Chapter 2 canal skip and the Chapter 9 super beverage skip that we talked about earlier? Rec also found those while working on the segmented run. After spending so much time developing the route for Segmented, Rec was now undeniably one of the most knowledgeable runners of the game. Not only that, but he now had a tool belt full of new skips at his disposal. He had already proven that sub 27 was possible in a segmented setting. So what could he do in single segment? Sub 31? Maybe even sub 30? When Rec came back to Any% in May of 2015, he came for blood. Thanks to all the new skips, Rec was able to get a PB of 31:28 even with some major mistakes. A better run was possible, and Rec knew it. In the comments section of his 31:28, which is unlisted to this day, Rec promises that he'll get a sub 31 soon. And he delivered just a month later with a 30:57. So, you're probably thinking what Rec was thinking. We are now less than a minute from sub 30. He would need just a little more time save to get there. Desperate for time save and confident in his abilities, Rec decided to do something even crazier than Chapter 9 Super Bev. He started implementing the Chapter 3 Crane's Kick Glitch into his Any% attempts. Crane's Kick Glitch isn't like Canal Skip or Super Bev. It's much more finicky, much more frustrating, and on a good day, getting it is a 50-50 shot for top runners. I do want to be clear. Although there isn't any true randomness when it comes to the skips I've discussed so far, it can often feel that way to runners when confronted with extremely difficult skips that are right on the edge of consistency. For those who have been counting, between Canal Skip, Crane's Kick Glitch, and Super Bev, that's already 3 proverbial coin flips necessary to get the world record. Of course, practicing would make these skips easier, but they were still very hard. Missing any of these skips would also lose between 20 seconds to a minute and lead to an instant reset. That's not even taking into account all the other hard stuff in between, accompanied by the game's unforgiving checkpoint system, which will punish the slightest mistakes with huge time loss. With the inclusion of these 3 particular skips, Any% was undeniably hard. But Rec was up to the challenge. His movement was getting better and better with each PB, snappy and precise in a way that's hard to emulate. He lowered the record 3 more times in July and August of 2015, landing on a 30:05. Sub 30 was just within reach. Although Rec had been at the top for quite some time, there was a new generation of runners lurking below him. Although they hadn't been running as long as Rec, they nevertheless rose quickly. You've got runners like Philotrax, an English runner who only started playing Any% in February of 2015, but had risen the ranks quickly to stand just behind longtime legends Submit and Floobs. Notably, there was one other runner tailing just behind Rec, Mr. Walrus. Walrus is a Finnish PC speedrunner and Twitch partner who came into the Mirror's Edge speedrunning scene in November of 2014. Much like Philo, he also rose the ranks quickly in large part due to his insane work ethic. There was a few-month period where I remember getting back from school every day, turning on my PC, and, like clockwork, Walrus was streaming Any%. And he wouldn't do these dinky 3-hour streams that most runners do. He would grind and grind and grind for hours at a time. Walrus's movement in-game was similarly efficient, robotic even. It was thanks to all that practice and improvement that Walrus became the second runner to start going for Crane's kick glitch in runs. As 2015 went on, everyone watched on Twitch as Walrus got more and more consistent at the game. Until finally, in November of 2015, with an uploaded offline run set to opera music of all things, Walrus did something really incredible. Sub 30 had finally been achieved. It took a lot of grinding offline and on stream, and a ton of runs thrown away to canals, cranes, and superbev. But, against all odds, Walrus had done it. There were only a handful of other runners consistent enough at the skips necessary to contest world record, and even then it'd still be difficult to beat Walrus's time. Any% would have to wait until a new skip was found. For the next few months, the community was mostly busy strat hunting and recording for a new community-segmented Any% project. During that time, many strat hunters got to work theory crafting a more consistent method for the 3A to 3C skip that Rec originally showed off in his segmented run. The first obstacle to conquer was finding an easier way out of bounds. Turns out that with a kick glitch and some precise wall climbs, you can more easily climb out of bounds. They also had to find an easier version of the kick glitch chain to hit the mid-air checkpoint. Luckily, that barrier was also broken when a prominent IL strat hunter, Glost, found a version of the chain that seemed single-segment viable. Much like the notorious Crane's kick glitch, you could build up insane speed with the help of a speedy kick glitch on this ledge and some precise wall boosts. The stars had aligned, and we were graced with another huge, difficult skip to bring Any% down. It was true that the new 3A 3C chain saved about 40 seconds, and it was easier than Crane's kick glitch. But really the question was, who would be crazy enough to implement a fourth incredibly hard skip into their route? And then, in March of 2016, a familiar face and longtime top runner answered that question. He'd been lurking in the background for quite a while. In fact, he got a 29:57 in January of that year, just 3 seconds off world record. But it wasn't a few months later, until March, that he destroyed the record. This runner is Philotrax, and he smashed Walrus's run with a 29:08. Although, it really wasn't the run many of us were expecting. Philo did indeed implement the new 3A 3C skip. Because of this huge new time save, he also decided to opt out of Crane's kick glitch. That still netted him 20 seconds of time save, which was paired with amazing movement through the whole rest of the run. I mean, look at the splits. Philo got a new best segment in 3 of his 10 splits in this run. Even crazier? He was only 13 years old at the time of this world record. And just like that, sub 29 went from a crazy theory to a very real possibility. There were a few runners that were capable. The question is, who would get there first? True to his form, in April of 2016, Walrus started grinding for it. Similar to Philo, he found that the new time save in 3A to 3C was enough to justify dropping Crane's kick glitch from the route, but that didn't mean it'd be easy.
Gonna lose all of my lead here, I think. I mean, I don't know. I've kind of accepted that you cannot actually get anything close to perfection in this game. It's way too hard for it.
After 6 months of on and off grinding, in October of 2016, Walrus was finally able to snag the world record back by 2 seconds from the 29:06. It wasn't the 28 many of us were looking for, but it was proof that the run could happen any day. Just because it could, though, doesn't mean it would. Walrus's progress in Mirror's Edge stalled as he switched to speedrunning the newly released Dishonored 2, and it was anyone's guess when the next world record would be achieved. But if you happened to guess December 2016, you'd be right. Longtime legend Rek came out of nowhere and sniped the world record with a 29:05. This world record was in large part due to his ludicrous inclusion of Crane's kick glitch back into the any percent route. Therefore, this was the first any percent run to use all 4 of what I've deemed the hard skips: Canals, 3A3C, Cranes, and Super Bev. Rek was developing a reputation as a high-risk, high-reward runner and an avid perfectionist. What Rek lacked in consistency, he made up for in crazy backup strats and ambitious routes. His 29:05 had lots of crazy moments like that. In Chapter 2, he goes for a super precise shortcut by jumping up to these pipes that, to this day, only a handful of runners have ever done in a run. In Chapter 5, Rek also does an IL-only kick glitch chain that saves 5 seconds. But, with all these high-risk strats, there are bound to be a few flaws. It's these mistakes, especially in the late game, that prevented Rek from achieving the sub-29 we all knew he was capable of. I think that seeing Rek get all those crazy tricks and then still not getting a 28 was demotivating for a lot of people. In January of 2017, there were still only 4 runners who had got a sub-30 time: Rek, Walrus, Philo, and Votium, another Australian runner who'd been working his way up the leaderboards for the past year or so. The 3 top runners were within 2 seconds of each other. It was anybody's game. But nobody really wanted to grind for it with the 4 hard skips standing in the way. Thankfully, a boost to morale was coming. And, for the 4th time in this video, it came thanks to a newly discovered version of Beverage Skip.
We found a new way to do Super Bev. And it's a lot easier than the first way.
A longtime runner named Heki found a consistent method of clipping through the roof of the beverage elevator using the coil jump animation. From there, Rek implemented a much more lenient setup for Super Bev, using the extra height from being on top of the elevator. This new strat was like a jump start to the community. With this new trick up his sleeve, Philo was back on the grind. And luckily, in May of 2017, it paid off with another huge PB. In classic Philo fashion, the young Mirror's Edge prodigy was able to smash through the 29-minute barrier. 28:39. With less runs dying at the very end, Philo was able to focus on his consistency and still get a huge world record, even without Crane's kick glitch. It also helped that the any percent community segmented project was nearing completion, and Philo had lots of small time saves to implement from the routes used in that project. The video quality of the run isn't great, but we wouldn't have to worry about that for long. Because a month later, in June of 2017, Walrus snuck in a new world record using almost the exact same route.
Not as good as it could be, but good enough to not do cranes, so it's nice.
Except he saved 3 seconds here and there and got a 28:36. But there was still one more skip standing in the way of that perfect run, and we all knew it. Who would be the first to do it? In August 2017, Philo finally gave us that answer. It was a solid run, with all 4 hard skips, and not many mistakes to point out. Although a 27-minute time seemed possible, it did not seem feasible. And, just like that, any percent was finally dead. Just 1 month after Philo's run, the Mirror's Edge Community Segmented Run was released. It was timed to be a 22:40, almost 6 minutes faster than the current world record, and more than 4 minutes faster than the previous segmented run. You'd think this might reinvigorate the community, but if anything, it reaffirmed how crazy hard the game was. The community segmented contained dozens of segments that took an hour or more to achieve even once. Philo already had a solid any percent time with all 4 hard skips, and there really wasn't anyone that could easily contest it. The community was burnt out after, I kid you not, almost 2 years of working on this segmented run, and from grinding any percent the past few months. And so, the community rested. This was probably the deadest the community had ever been. Rek was still playing the game, but he was more focused on strat hunting and ILs. Walrus had moved away from speedrunning, Submit and Floobs were long gone, and Philo was taking a long-deserved break from the game. In the next year or so, there were runners that were getting sub 30 times, but no new people that could break that 29-minute barrier. None, of course, other than Votium. About 5 months after Philo's run, in January of 2018, Vo started implementing Crane's kick glitch into his runs. Because of that crazy decision, he was finally able to secure a spot among the upper echelon of Mirror's Edge runners with his PB of 2850. Like most things in speedrunning, perfection didn't come easily. Vo continued to play Mirror's Edge in those next few months, honing his skills on time trials and chapter runs. His movement over this period would also improve. Much like Philo, he used a lower mouse sensitivity that allowed his movement to be characteristically smooth and deliberate, making his runs a real treat to watch. With Vo's consistency improving, he also started implementing other skips that previously only Philo and Walrus were able to pull off in single segment. Most notably, this harder than it looks pedestrian skip in Chapter 1. After getting out of bounds, the skip involves running on an invisible wall and avoiding invisible collision to kick glitch to a later part of the level, saving close to 10 seconds. If anyone was able to beat Philo's world record at this point, it was either Rek or Vo. Rek ended up getting a 28:28 in mid-2018, but he was never able to cinch world record. Much like Rek, Vo continued to practice Mirror's Edge on and off for the next year or so. Finally, almost a year and a half after Philo's world record, in January of 2019, Vo was finally ready to come back and conquer any percent. And he was hoping to do it without Crane's kick glitch.
World record is impossible at the moment. Are you getting world record for documentation? No. Well, I'm not going to be doing Crane's kick glitch. If I don't have to. Still sub-wreckable. I don't think I'm going to get the record off this. This has been such an insane shard that there's potential for a goal. And there's potential for 28-19 or tied. Oh my god, dude. Oh my god. There's absolutely no way that's world record, but it's tied. It's tied by the second, not by the millisecond though.
And, somehow, Vo had managed to catch Philo with his own 28:20. Unfortunately, when timing things down to the millisecond, Philo's run ended up being faster. For some, being so close to the world record might be motivation to continue grinding. But Mirror's Edge any percent is a grueling category, and it just wasn't Vo's time yet. Along with getting good times in other staple PC speedruns, like Dishonored and Portal, Vo spent the next year continuing to improve at Mirror's Edge and snatch up more IL world records. Vo also got consistent at a newer version of the original Jackknife chain that Rek premiered in his original segmented. Once again, in August of 2019, Vo felt the urge to come back and finish what he had started with any percent. After almost 2 years without a new world record, it was time to take Philo down. With a 28:10 that same August, Vo was finally able to secure the spot that had long awaited him at the top of the leaderboards. But Vo wasn't done just yet. He was only 10 seconds away from sub 28, and there was a certain skip that he hadn't implemented yet that saved 20 seconds. Like so many other runners before him, Vo was given a decision, whether or not to re-implement Crane's kick glitch. And, like so many other runners before him, he made the tough choice to do it. But, unlike runners before him, Vo had almost 2 years of IL practice and strat development to back him up. The sub 28 wouldn't take a year. It wouldn't even take a month. It would only take another week. The run, like any speedrun, wasn't perfect. Glaringly, a second try chase chain and a second try Crane's kick glitch meant this run was beatable. But Vo, for now, was content. Getting all 4 of the original hard skips in his run, and getting a chase chain in Chapter 2, which is just as hard as those other hard skips. It's utter insanity. And this is probably where the world record would have stood, if not for a crucial discovery that would finally nerf the hardest skip in the game.
So welcome to the Crane's Kick Glitch tutorial. I'm making this tutorial today because it's recently been rediscovered, kind of, that Crane's Kick Glitch is actually pretty darn consistent when you do it with reaction time.
It might be more accurate to call it a rediscovery, because back in 2018, Rek had mentioned offhand in a few people's chats that Crane's Kick Glitch was easier with reaction time. Rek never ended up posting a video, and nobody he mentioned it to could get it to work. Classic Rek. The reaction time method wouldn't see the light of day until about 2 years later, when a few runners messing around in a Discord chat found a consistent setup. Crane's Kick Glitch was more consistent than it had ever been. Although it would lose 5 seconds to use reaction time, it would still save 15 seconds over the route most runners used, and it would certainly save time over the second try Crane's Kick Glitch Vo had in his world record. Of course, Vo knew that too. So, in May of 2020, Vo came back to finish the job.
Oh.
27:41 by Votium. With few obvious contenders in sight, that's where the world record stands to this day. Mirror's Edge Any% has come a long way since the game's release in 2008. We started with a run from Weatherproof, didn't even use the kick glitch, and ended up with a world record that chains together a half dozen kick glitches in the first 30 seconds. At this point, it's anyone's guess as to when the world record will trade hands again. Vo has played with the idea of coming back to Any% and getting a 26 by implementing more borderline segmented strats. Rek has also hinted that he wants to get a 26. But we don't necessarily have to rely on the old guard. With people stuck at home due to COVID-19 this past year, the Mirror's Edge community really saw a resurgence. At this point, there are now a dozen runners who have achieved sub 30 times, and we also saw another 2 runners join the ranks with sub 29s. Maybe Zamit will rise from the dead and finally get his sub 30, who knows? Only time will tell. Mirror's Edge has always had a high skill ceiling. That makes it an amazing speed game, but also a difficult one. I'm not here to guess the next world record, or when it will be achieved, but I am here to shine a light on all the amazing runners, who found many of the iconic skips we still use to this day, who ruled over the category, who dethroned the king, who changed the route forever, who broke through the crazy minute barriers, who almost killed the category, and who rose above all the others. This has been the world record history from Mirror's Edge Any%. Thank you so much for watching. Okay, I've got some people to thank, and we haven't quite hit an hour yet on this video, so let's knock this out. Thank you to everyone who helped with the writing and editing of the script, and really to the whole Mirror's Edge community. You all have been a big part of my life since the beginning of high school, which is crazy, but I am so grateful. There's a ton of speedrun creators who have inspired me throughout the years, too many to name. But obviously, big shoutouts to Summoning Salt, whose videos about speedrunning history and about world record history have been such an inspiration to me and so many others. I'll link some of my favorite videos of his in the description. And also, big shoutouts to Average Trey, whose Sunshine world record history videos in particular inspired me to branch out and try my own for Mirror's Edge. Lastly, I'd be remiss not to shout out the Rixer, who created an amazing video detailing the story of the 3 Mirror's Edge gods and their reign over the IL scene. Ricky makes a ton of awesome speedrunning content, so I'll link that video, and really all of these channels I've discussed, down in the description below. While you're down there, feel free to look over the track list I made for this video. It is timestamped with all the songs I used in the background throughout the whole video. Anyway, it's past midnight, I have work tomorrow, and I've been editing this video for a week straight, so I'm gonna be done now. Thanks again for watching. Take care of yourselves, be good to each other, and happy running.